Welcome to Tentpole Trauma, the podcast where we look at movies that came with hype and high hopes, but left with crushing disappointment, either critically, at the box office, or both. Freed from the weight of expectations, we seek to examine these underperformers under a new light, parsing through the good, the bad, and everything in between with the hopes of gaining a better understanding as to why they failed to find their audience. Warning, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie that we're discussing today, I suggest you stop the podcast and go watch it. Then when you come back and listen, you'll get more out of the discussion. On this episode, we discuss Cowboys and Aliens. Okay, I am Sebastian and I am here with Jennifer.
Hello.
And we are doing another Just the Two of Us podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of a special podcast because this one came in as a request from a Twitter user named Magna Viking.
That's right.
We don't know who he is in real life, but we know he's from Scotland.
That's right. And he loves James Bond, and he's a fan of Tentpole Trauma and a really great supporter of the podcast.
You know who else is a fan of James Bond?
Oh, I know who's a fan of James Bond, especially the most recent James Bond.
That's right. I am a huge James Bond fan myself. I have struggled to try to come up with a James Bond movie to do for Tentpole Trauma, but they're all pretty successful. Even the least successful ones have been successful. So that's why we haven't discussed James Bond, because there aren't any actual bombs.
No James Bomb.
No James Bomb. But we can talk about Daniel Craig in some movies, including the movie that we're talking about now, which is Cowboys and Aliens.
That's right. And boy, do you love to talk about Daniel Craig.
I really do. I have a huge man crush on Daniel Craig. I find him very attractive and sexy. I was happy to see that in this movie he takes off his shirt.
Wasn't just for the ladies.
Wasn't just for the ladies, it was for me too.
That's right.
This is kind of, I would say, peak Daniel Craig. I think this is him almost at his very hottest and sexiest. It's right in the middle of his James Bond run, so he's looking really good. I mean, obviously he's middle-aged at this point, but he's wearing it well, I think.
He doesn't know what middle age is. I mean, he may be that way number-wise, but that doesn't really affect Daniel Craig, does it?
I don't know. I guess we'll see. We'll have to see how he looks in the new James Bond. He looks a little craggy in the new James Bond, or Daniel Craggy. He's looking a little craggy, but I think it looks good.
I think he wears it well,
Yeah.
and I'm always happy to see him, and I also am happy to talk about him. And I totally accept Daniel Craig's place in your heart.
I'm glad you're not jealous of him.
And I'm not jelly of Daniel Craig.
He's with Rachel Weisz, so he doesn't have eyes for me. You don't have to worry about him. But yeah, this movie, Cowboys and Aliens, is a movie from 2011. It had a big budget, and it didn't make a lot of money at the box office, so it definitely qualifies for Tentpole Trauma. It's also one of those movies that I feel like has just pretty much disappeared from people's collective memories. I don't think many people ever even think of this movie at all, ever, except for our good friend Magna Viking, our good friend and listener. He wanted to hear our take on it. It was on the list of movies that I planned to talk about, so I was happy to do it. And yeah, I just figured you and I could do this pretty easily.
Oh, yeah. I was happy to watch it because this was my first viewing, and I know you've seen it probably a few times now.
I have seen it a couple of times now, but let's get into just a quick sort of background on this movie. Interestingly, this was a concept that was kicking around since 1994, and it was originally just like a film pitch that this guy made. I don't have his name right in front of me. Who cares? He's a guy that worked for, or he was just pitching movies, and then he couldn't get this made, so he actually turned it into a comic book, in 2006. And around this time in 2006, and before and after, there were a lot of people who were sort of taking their Hollywood pitches and making them into comic books. They'd make them into graphic novels, basically, and sort of sell them the idea as a graphic novel, and then the studios would look at them and say, oh, okay, let's make this. It kind of got a lot of flack from the comic book reading public because you could sort of sniff out these projects pretty easily after a while. It would be like, oh, there's like limited run of comics that's got this high concept idea, and you could just tell like, oh, this is just somebody trying to pitch their big budget movie to Hollywood.
First, I didn't know that. I think that's really interesting. Secondly, I could totally see this as a comic book. Like, this seems like it would fit well into the world of comics.
Yes.
I can understand comic book fans bristling against, like, kind of feeling like they're being used in a sense. Yes. I think their medium is being used. But what a clever way to pitch your idea, because you're actually, like, you're not just having to do some quick elevator pitch, especially for something that's so grand as this, like, and what's going to be happening. Like, you're actually being able to show someone has drawn like a storybook or a storyboard, so to speak, of your film. I understand why the comic community would not like it, but I am kind of impressed. I think it's a very clever way to get something like this made.
I think the main reason why comic readers didn't like it was because the creators would just sort of abandon it immediately after it was out. There was no real intention to continue it on as a series, and what comic book readers get invested in is ongoing stories. So I don't think it was so much that they were bristling at the idea of the comic. I think they were just bristling at the fact that once it was out there and got picked up as a movie, then they wouldn't continue with the comic.
Well, and that's what we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm saying that they're bristling at the idea that because they're feeling used.
Yes,
like
exactly,
they're feeling like they've been used and just it's just been tossed aside. Whereas yes, series is the whole thing. Like, you want to, like, that's what's great about comics, and you may only get, like, even from the superhero films, is you only get, like, maybe one story in a film, or maybe it's from a couple of different comics or whatever, but then you can still get more. Like, there's always more.
If you were really invested in the world of Cowboys and Aliens and wanted to see the continuing adventures of Jake Lonergan fighting, I don't know, werewolves or whatever he was going to fight next, you weren't going to get it.
No,
the comics wasn't going to give it to you. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where the resentment comes
I get
from.
it. No, I totally get that. But also kudos to this guy for doing it and getting his film made.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is definitely a clever way to get your idea out there. And yeah, comics are visual medium, and so ideas that are sort of visual and imaginative can be expressed very clearly in comics, so it makes sense,
Especially for this, like I said, I can't imagine an elevator pitch for this.
Yeah,
like, this is kind of, the concept is kind of bananas.
Well, the elevator pitch would just be, there's Cowboys and Aliens. I mean, it's the title. It's like Snakes on a Plane or whatever.
I guess.
Where do you go from there? Yeah. You can go a lot of places. I have not read the comic, but it apparently is only slightly resembles the movie. Like, the setup is the same, where you have this outlaw who can't remember who he is, and he's got this weapon on his arm, and he doesn't know what it is. That's basically the same, and there's aliens and stuff, but beyond that, I think it was completely redone for the screen. So comic book is not that much like the movie, to my knowledge. But anyway, so yeah, it ended up in the hands of John Favreau. Now, do you have any thoughts or opinions on John Favreau as a director or an actor or anything?
Yeah, I'm a fan of his. I like, he didn't direct Swingers, did he?
No, Doug Liman did.
Doug Liman did, okay. But I feel like I've seen other stuff that he's directed, though.
He directed Made, which was sort
with
of
Vince Vaughn.
Like Swingers.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm not as familiar with him as a director as I am as an actor. And I do like him as an actor. I think he's great.
I am definitely pretty familiar with him as a director and an actor too. Obviously, I've seen most of the stuff he's acted in. He's Happy Hogan in the Marvel movies, so he shows up in a lot of the Iron Man movies. He's been in the Spider-Man movies and Avengers movies. But I also am a big fan of him most recently because of The Mandalorian. He created The Mandalorian, and he wrote, I think, most of the episodes, and he actually hasn't directed a lot of The Mandalorian, but he's basically the main creative force, him and Dave Filoni, behind The Mandalorian. And interestingly, in relation to this film, The Mandalorian is very heavily influenced by Westerns. Star Wars obviously was already sort of influenced by Westerns, but The Mandalorian sort of takes it to a whole nother level. He's very much a gunslinger, man with no namey type of character. Most of the stories are the kind of stories that you would see in a Western. I mean, there's even an episode where Timothy Oliphant plays like a sheriff in a town, and it's straight up Western for most of it, like in terms of its sort of the genre that it's aping. So while I was watching this today, I was sort of reminded of that, of like, oh no, John Favreau kind of likes Westerns, and you can sort of tell from this movie, and he has gone on to sort of incorporate more of that ideas into The Mandalorian, and also putting it in a sci-fi setting. So I would say The Mandalorian is probably the more successful take on a sci-fi Western.
Yeah. I think everyone has like Mandalorian fever.
Right.
And I don't think we can say the same about this film.
No, but I don't think that it's an outright terrible movie or anything, but we'll get into it. I'll get your thoughts, and I have no idea what you think of this movie. So yeah, I'm a fan of John Favreau. The writers who are involved in this are Roberto Orci and the other guy that he works with, and also Damon Lindelof from Lost, and more recently he's sort of redeemed himself with Watchmen.
And The Leftovers.
Yeah, he also wrote Prometheus. This was really the time when people were really bagging on Damon Lindelof, because I think Lost ended around 2010, and for whatever reason he took a lot of the blame for that. And then this came out, people were like, and then Prometheus came out, he co-wrote that, and people were unhappy with that. So I remember from 2012 on, it was sort of like, Damon Lindelof sucks.
Yeah.
And then he did Watchmen and kind of redeemed himself, and The Leftovers too. But Watchmen was definitely, people were really worried about it because he was involved, and everybody was like, Damon Lindelof's going to ruin Watchmen. And
whereas like The Leftovers, nobody had any investment in that.
No.
It was just like, but I think he did a great job with that too.
He did, yeah. There wasn't a lot of nerd investment in the Leftovers. There's a huge nerd investment in Watchmen.
Oh, yeah.
So that was high stakes. Oh, it's Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman. Sorry, Alex Kurtzman, I forgot your name.
Well, I'm glad you got that in there.
They were involved. There were a bunch of other writers too, but those were the three big heavy hitter writers who were involved in this. Now, when this came out in 2011, I did not see it in the theater. I don't know, I just didn't have the wherewithal to see it. It just sort of passed me by. So yeah, I didn't see it until it came out on Blu-ray. And when I first watched it on Blu-ray, I was like, it was all right. I don't think I was like fully paying attention the whole time. I got kind of bored with it and sort of tuned it out. And then I came back to it not too long ago. I mean, maybe 6 months or maybe a year now. I watched it again and I was like, it's not bad. I kind of reevaluated it.
I don't remember this film at all. I think I might have been working at Cinephile, the video store, at the time. And I remember I was going to the New Art a lot too. And I just don't think I was on my radar for big budget stuff.
Yeah.
But I honestly have, and I like Daniel Craig and I like a lot of the cast, and we'll get into that. And I am a fan of Westerns, and I do like Aliens too, but it's like I was looking into the Deadlights, and we'll get into that later regarding this film, because I just completely passed me by.
I was aware of it. I just didn't get around to seeing it. It was, late in the summer. I had other things to do. I don't think the reviews were particularly glowing, although they weren't terrible. It got sort of middling reviews, and I was just like, I'll catch it when it comes out on Blu-ray.
It's our fault that it didn't do well, I guess.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
All right, well, let's get into Cowboys and Aliens. Our film opens up with our main protagonist, Jake Lonergan, as played by the incredibly handsome and steely-eyed Daniel Craig. He basically wakes up in the desert and he's got a pretty bad wound in his side, and he's got this strange device that he doesn't know what it is attached to his wrist, which is really weird for a cowboy because this is the 1800s and we don't have that kind of thing back then. And like these rustlers or something show up and they give him a hard time, but then he fights back and kills them and realizes this thing on his hand can do some pretty crazy shit. And so, yeah, that's the basic setup. And we also sort of get the sense that he doesn't know what's going on.
Yep.
He is amnesiac.
Exactly.
So, yeah, how did you feel coming into this with this opening scene?
I thought it was a fine opening scene. I thought it was, it's like, I want to know what's going on too. I'm right there with you, Daniel Craig. Like, what is this thing on your arm? Who are you? Wow, you can kick ass. You're obviously some sort of fighting man that can like handle himself, because he totally takes down, like, it was like 5 guys.
Yeah.
And then he takes off into town.
I'm pretty sure there's one shot where you see Daniel Craig jump at a guy on a horse and tackle him off the horse. And I'm pretty sure that's Daniel Craig doing it for real. I may have been tricked, but I was like, whoa, Daniel Craig really threw himself at that dude and tackled him off of a horse.
It's Daniel Craig. I just like to believe he does all the stunts.
I do think this movie looks good.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's shot well. I think the action is pretty decent.
Yep.
And I think the performances are pretty solid all around.
Would agree.
Daniel Craig wanders into the town of Absolution, and he meets Clancy Brown, who's playing a preacher. An unusual part for Clancy Brown in that he's a sympathetic character who's not a villain in any way. I'm just so primed to think of Clancy Brown as being the villain. So as soon as he shows up, I'm like, oh, he's the bad guy. And it's like, no, he's not.
No, he's always a creep pretty much in his roles. And it was great to see him as this good, likable preacher, like very down to earth or whatever. Like he was just kind of not, I mean, he's religious, but he's also living, he's a realist also. And I was endeared to him.
Sort of a salt of the earth type of guy.
Yeah, like one of those people or preachers or whatever that has probably seen some shit and done some shit in his life and, has found God or whatever now and is, doing that thing, but he's lived.
So he recognizes that Daniel Craig probably is a trouble of some sort, but because he's a preacher, he offers to sew him up and stuff, so he sews him up. And then they're sort of drawn outside by this kerfuffle that happens. There's a young man who's causing some problems at the local saloon. He's played by Paul Dano, who's an interesting actor to me. I have yet to fully embrace Paul Dano, although I kind of can see that he's very talented. I'm excited to see what he does with the character of the Riddler. He's playing the Riddler in the new Batman movie.
I could see that.
Yeah, so I think he could be good. I noticed this time he's quite tall.
He is very tall.
He doesn't seem tall because he's got this kind of childlike face, like he's going to look like a child for his whole life, and that is played to the hilt in this movie. Yeah. He's sort of a just rotten adult man baby. But he's giving the barkeep a hard time because he's gotten drunk and he's not going to pay him. And the barkeep is Doc, and he is played by Sam Rockwell, who is an actor that I really love. I always love to see Sam Rockwell. I really kind of like him in this movie. It seems like sort of a nothing part, but he kind of does something with it. He's this former doctor, I guess, who's come out to the West. He's got a Hispanic wife who really loves him. They've opened up this saloon, and he's kind of feels like he's not really a man because he's probably a guy who's well educated. He was a doctor before. He's not used to living out in the Wild West. This is sort of an archetypal character we see sometimes in Westerns. The, educated man who's now living out West, and he just can't really cut it with all the cowboys and all the tough guys and the bandits.
He's out of his element. is what it is. Like he's followed his dream, according to his wife. This is what they wanted to do, was open this bar out west. Just because that's his dream doesn't mean he's going to, like you said, be able to fit into this new world, so to speak. So yeah, I like him too. I always like Sam Rockwell. I'm a fan of Paul Dano, so I was happy to see him in this, and I think he's great as this horrible, entitled young adult.
We find out that he is the son of like the big cattle rancher in the area, so he gets to basically do whatever he wants, and nobody can really say anything to him.
He's like Francis and Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So I totally kept thinking, I was like, he's like Francis.
That's funny. Yeah, that's totally what he's like. But he's got this American Indian sidekick, or he's sort of like his guardian, and he'll sort of figure importantly into the story. So he's causing these problems. He's like knocking off Sam Rockwell's glasses and like shooting at the dirt and stuff, and shooting at Sam Rockwell's bar and everything. The local sheriff gets called in, who is Keith Carradine. Paul Dano's just not going to behave. He goes around and he's trying to collect money facetiously from people. And he goes up to Daniel Craig, who's sort of sitting there looking cool, watching him. And Daniel Craig basically like knees him in the balls.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, it's something that you definitely want to see. I think Paul Dano's good in this movie. He sort of disappears from the movie, though. Like, he's in this sort of setup, but then he's gone.
Well, he's literally taken.
Yes, he's literally taken. So Paul Dano is arrested by Keith Carradine. I think Keith Carradine does a great job here. He's also in a sort of smaller role, but, you know, Keith Carradine in a Western, that's a no-brainer.
Perfect.
And he takes him to jail. Keith Carradine also realizes that Daniel Craig is an outlaw, and there's wanted posters for him around, so he knows he's got to take him in. There's also a character that's sort of hanging around in the periphery, played by Olivia Wilde. Mm-hmm. And she's sort of just, she's kind of cowgirly type of person, but it's not really made clear. She's kind of watching and hovering in the background. She comes up to Daniel Craig at the bar and wants to talk to him, but he's only interested in drinking. And then Keith Carradine and his men come in to arrest Daniel Craig. A fight ensues, and then Olivia Wilde knocks him out. So he is then taken in.
Well, yeah, and they have both he and Paul Dano there because they're waiting for the marshal to come pick them up.
And Daniel Craig gets another shot in. Paul Dano comes too close to the bars, and Daniel Craig grabs him and slams his head against the bars, knocking him out.
Well, because Paul Dano woke Daniel Craig up by spitting on him. So gross.
Yeah.
Like, he was like literally like just like snake spitting on him over and over again until it woke him up. And Daniel Craig was kind of dreaming. Again, he doesn't know who he is, doesn't know his past, but he was having these very vivid dreams about a lady.
Yeah.
And seeing her and like a place where they had lived. And I think this is when he was dreaming about the gold and everything too, where he brought gold in, and you kind of are starting to understand that he's, an outlaw. I mean, we know that from the posters, but like, I mean, he's like, robbing stagecoaches and whatever to get gold.
A lot of this stuff that's sort of going on in the backstory, like with his wife, who we learned was a former prostitute, and he's part of this gang, and they stole this gold and everything. All of this stuff is very kind of archetypally Western too. Like, I feel like the way this movie is constructed, it's very much a Western. The aliens are just kind of dialed in there. They're just taking the place of what normally like the American Indians would be, like,
or whoever the big bad Western is.
Yeah, like whoever, or rustlers or whatever.
Whoever.
In some ways, it's a strength of the film because these things, if you're familiar with Western tropes, are kind of shortcuts. You're like, oh, he's the guy who fell in love with the prostitute, and now they live out in this one little shack out in the middle of the plains. They always live in that shack. I feel like I've seen that shack in a million westerns.
So many.
Like
so many.
Clint Eastwood goes to see his wife, and then and then she gets killed.
And they set the shack on fire.
Right,
and,
yeah. It's like The Outlaw of Josie Wales,
Yeah.
I believe, has that exact same sort of backstory. And there's a lot of that in this movie. I'm not offering that as a criticism. I think in some ways it works well, just because you're like, oh, I know this. I know how this goes.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a familiarity. It's like kind of legitimizing the westernness of it. It's like, this is a western, and I like all of those things. And I was thinking, I'm like, this is actually a pretty interesting idea, because kind of along the lines of how we've talked about hauntings and things that seem to happen over only really in certain times, or the specters are from a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
Alien invasions are always kind of in present day,
Right?
I mean, even if the film is from the 70s or 80s or whatnot, it's present day when it's happening. Like, we haven't really seen something that's in the past. And why, if there are aliens, then why wouldn't they be invading all the time?
Well, I guess the idea would be that if they did, then everyone would know that there were aliens, and we've never had contact. We haven't had first contact with aliens. But I mean, in this movie, it's done in a way so that they would be forgotten or whatever.
Right.
Most alien invasion stories have a moment where everyone's like, oh my God, there's aliens, now that we've had that moment where we know there's somebody else out there in the universe. But, you can get around that.
But they do work around that with this.
It has been done a few times in different things. There's a movie called Outlander, not to be confused with the TV show, but that stars like Jim Caviezel, that has him fighting like an alien from outer space in like Viking times. It has a sort of similar thing where he's actually from outer space. Like we're going to find out Olivia Wilde is. Anyway, not to digress. But you're right, it's not a very common type of thing, but there has been some movies and stuff that have had aliens showing up in the past. And of course, you have to make it so that at the end, there's no proof of it or whatever.
Sure.
So yeah, after that, what it basically happens is the aliens come and start shooting up the town. They start flying in and they grab people with their like alien lassos, like they're cattle rustlers. They're in these sort of flying ships, and it's the big action scene that sort of kicks off the story. And the whole time Daniel Craig's like trapped in this stagecoach chained to Paul Dano.
Supposed to be going to the federal marshal, so they're chained to one another, and the coach tips over, and he's trying to get out, and he tells Paul Dano, like, I can get you out, just let me get you out, and he breaks his hand.
Yeah. I'd like to see Paul Dano get abused.
I didn't. I mean, that character was well deserving of some pain. Again, going back to what we normally see as far as alien abductions go, it's usually like a light beaming somebody up, or or they just disappear or whatever. But it's like here we're actually seeing kind of like a lasso / bungee cord or something that's like reaching out and grabbing these people and taking them off with these kind of fighter jet looking crafts of some sort. Like they look like they're not manned.
They seem like drones, although we do see aliens come out of them at some point. Yeah, I appreciate that they do a kind of lasso-y type of thing just to keep it in the Western feel of it. But I mean, the big kind of element that's introduced here is we meet our other sort of main protagonist, played by Harrison Ford. He's Dollarhide, who is the big cattle rancher. He's riding into town to get his kid out of the hoosegow, and that's when the aliens attack. Now, how do you feel about Harrison Ford in this movie and in this role? Do you like him as Dollarhide?
I really do, and I actually... I like the character of Dollarhide.
Yeah.
I like that, and I feel that this film actually does a good job of, like, a lot of the characters are complex.
Yes.
They're not, just you're bad and you're the good guy or whatever. I mean, right out the gate, we already have Daniel Craig, who, we don't know fully his past, but it's troubled. I mean, if he's wanted by the law, he's obviously done some unsavory things. And, again, Dollarhide, who's like the big deal in town, is also a giant asshole.
Yep.
With his shitty son. And, we go through a lot with him and come out liking Dollarhide.
Yeah, it's actually pretty well done the way he's handled. He
Yeah.
gets sort of a whole story arc
Yeah.
that plays out. I feel like Harrison Ford is doing a pretty good job.
I think so. I think he's well cast.
This was, coming off an era of Harrison Ford stuff where he seemed to really be sort of phoning it in. He seemed like almost in danger of Bruce Willising out. He'd just be grumpy and gruff. And he is just grumpy and gruff in this movie. But I feel like he's giving a performance, and he's playing it well, and he's letting the character evolve and stuff. So I give him credit for doing a good job in this movie. Obviously, I love Harrison Ford.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
He can be guilty of phoning it in. And I don't feel like he's really phoning it in here. So yeah, I mean, this basically just sets off the plot in motion, which more or less involves a big posse of guys and one gal and a kid and a dog. The kid is the grandson or something of David Carradine.
Yeah, and the backstory of the kid is that I think his mother had died also in the town. I don't know what happened to the father, but all he really has is his grandfather at this point, and his grandfather gets taken.
This kid's name is Noah Ringer. The year before this, he had done that terrible M. Night Shyamalan Last Airbender. He was the main kid in that.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of flack for that. I think he's probably the weak link here. I know that's kind of a unfair thing to level at a child actor. He does fine, but he's definitely not great, and I can kind of see why he sort of disappeared after this. This was just kind of his moment as a kid actor where he was showing up and stuff.
I didn't have a problem with him. I didn't really care.
I didn't have a problem with him. I just didn't think he was exceptional. I wasn't like, oh, let's watch for this kid, like he's not that good. He's fine. He fits the bill. He does the job, but
well, he hasn't really done anything since then. So I think that was his last role, was Cowboys and Aliens, to be honest. Like, he hasn't done anything.
Well, I hope he's doing something that he finds satisfying.
Well, I was reading, just because now I'm curious, I was just reading his little bio on IMDb, and apparently he's really into Taekwondo. Hopefully he's enjoying life doing Taekwondo and just being a kid, because he's born in 97, so...
Well, he's not a kid anymore.
No, he's got to be, like in his 20s now?
Yeah, 97. He would have been 20 in 2017.
Wow, so he's like 24.
I hope he's not.
I hope he's not. I hope he's not weird.
Anyway, if you're out there, Noah Ringer, no offense.
No offense. No, we hope you're living your best life, and I think you're great in this. Cowboys and Aliens is our dog Annie's new favorite film.
Yes.
Because Annie loves Westerns, because she loves horses.
Yep.
They're really exciting. And this film has a dog in it as well, who's with us the whole time, thankfully.
Yep.
Spoilers, sorry, but I'm happy to see that, because anytime a beloved dog shows up on screen, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, if you're a dog lover who doesn't like to see dogs getting killed and you want to watch Cowboys and Aliens,
yeah,
feel free. There is a moment where it seems like the dog might have gotten killed by an alien, but don't you worry, the dog reappears.
Well, because in a lot of Westerns, that is the motivation for, was it Pale Rider? I think that was one of the main motivations, was the girl, her dog had gotten, like, they killed everyone, like, in the town, and
right,
then they like killed her dog too. Like, it was just terrible. I think it was Pale Rider. Was
think
that
so.
Yeah. But yeah, so yes, dog is fine in this. Annie was thrilled. Annie does something. I did capture some photos of it, so maybe I'll share it on social media. But she gets really excited and runs over and puts her paws up on the console so she can get as close to the TV as possible.
This is all true.
Yeah, and it's all great. Yeah. So anyway, that was one of the highlights of watching this today, was seeing Annie's excitement.
Horses and a dog together, forget it. 5 stars.
5 stars.
From Annie.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, from here, the movie is basically just a bunch of men and one woman and a kid and a dog riding out to track down these aliens. One of the aliens was wounded in the initial attack in the town, and so everybody's got their sort of own motivations for going after this thing. Harrison Ford wants to get his son back, and Sam Rockwell wants to get his wife back. So, they form
and the young kid's trying to get the sheriff back because that's his grandpa. I mean, like it's mainly they're trying to go and get the people back that were taken. I mean, that's the main motivation. And they have this motley crew, this posse that's heading out, and they just can't catch a break.
No.
Like, I mean, that's kind of what, it's, I think that's kind of standard beats for like going on a quest.
Yeah.
Is just, they keep running into like, first, I think they run into what we find out to be Daniel Craig's old gang. I think that's the first people they run into.
Yeah. I mean, we have a little brief moment where Daniel Craig refuses the call on the Campbellian journey. He's like, I'm not going with you. And then he goes off to his old shack in the middle of the plains and then starts to remember some stuff and remembers his wife, and that's, I guess, motivation for him to come back to the gang.
Yeah.
Then at one point they run into his old gang, so we're sort of getting some understanding of who he was before he lost his memory. And we get the great Walton Goggins.
Love him, love him, love him.
It's always good to see Walton Goggins. He fits right into Westerns. You got to have him in there if you have a Western these days.
Oh, yeah. Daniel
Craig punches him in the mouth and breaks his teeth. And so Walton's kind of like, you break my teeth, you broke my tooth. He's very comedic in this movie. Walton Goggins is either going to be kind of a comedic figure or he's going to be a villainous figure. He's not much of a villain in this. He's really actually kind of sympathetic, but he's comedic. He's played for comedy.
I think some of his villainous characters still have comedy to it.
There's crossover
there's
there
humor
too.
In there, yeah, because his timing is just so great. He's such a great fun actor. Daniel Craig doesn't recognize any of these people. He's like, because they roll up on them and this gang of people are like, all right, this is a hold up. This is what we're doing, and then they're like, boss, Kong's like, boss, is that you? Where did you go? So that's how we're introduced to Daniel Craig's former life.
Yeah, and I like the way Daniel Craig is playing it here. He's like, so do we have all our men?
Yeah.
How many of them? And Walton Goggins like 30?
Yeah.
And he's like, yes, 30. That's how many there are. Now, I will say I've seen Daniel Craig now in a bunch of roles where he's playing an American. He struggles a little with his accent. It's not perfect here. I think he does a pretty good job because it's a Western, so he's kind of, getting to sort of exaggerate, having a little bit of a drawl. He did really well in Knives Out.
Knives Out, I was like, Knives Out, his drawl is perfection.
Yeah, but it's exaggerated.
Yeah.
He gets away with it when he can be exaggerated with it.
I don't know. I didn't notice that, but you got your eyes on Craig, so.
I think he does fine, but you definitely hear little slips here and there where he doesn't quite nail it. But I think he's got such a great face for a Western.
Oh, absolutely.
Character. I sort of wish he would be in another Western one of these days. Maybe he will, but this, to my knowledge, is the only one I can think of off the top of my head, and I feel like he fits in well in the Western milieu.
Oh, yeah. He would be great.
I really like when we see the wanted posters of him, and he's just got this bug-eyed look on his face. It's so great. But yeah, he basically can't really get the gang to go along with him. And then do they get attacked by aliens here?
I think they get attacked by aliens.
I feel like the movie sets up all these sort of scenes where, like, oh, they're in a jam because of whatever, because of, either the outlaws or later we get Native Americans or whatever, and then some alien thing happens to just kind of like shake it up so they can get away or whatever.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. Like, it's the quest formula or whatever. It's like they just, it's like, okay, now we meet the outlaws, and then aliens show up or whatever, and we scatter.
Yeah.
Then they get into a rainstorm, so they go to this boat
It's a riverboat that's upside down.
Which is pretty cool.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and
really
it's like not anywhere near the river. That was the other thing
like
that people
200 miles.
Yeah, people like there's no river around here, so it's a great visual. I really like this part of the movie.
I do too. It's cool, and it kind of the movie slows down here for a minute. And we get some character stuff as they're sort of riding out the storm. In this upside down riverboat. It kind of reminded me the set a little bit of the Poseidon
I was
Adventure.
Thinking that too, yes.
Because we watched that not too long ago, and it's a lot of upside downs.
Totally.
I like a boat upside down. I don't know what to tell you. Put me in an upside down boat and I'm happy.
I'm here for it too.
But, we get some nice stuff with the characters, like Harrison Ford has a good moment with the kid where he gives him a knife. Well, first he's having this moment with the Native American guy who's the handler of his son. And there's this sort of brief moment where Harrison Ford's kind of mean to him. We get the sense that Harrison Ford has a thing against the Native Americans because of his past. He was in the army and he came upon a bunch of settlers being murdered or whatever. It's again, like I'm talking about, this sort of Western, shorthand.
Yeah.
This is just something that you see has happened to people in Westerns. So the movie sort of cleverly just uses that as his backstory as to why he doesn't like Native Americans.
Well, and he's just like, the actor, and I was looking, I think his name is Alex Beach. Does that sound right? For the guy who's like the right-hand Native American guy. His name is Adam Beach. Because I've seen him in other stuff. I recognize his face. He was in, I think he was in Flags of Our Fathers, and he was actually in Suicide Squad. Slipknot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, I just recognize his face. Anyway, he was talking about some stories that Harrison Ford used to tell, and then he's like, well, those were meant for my son, not for your ears, and go check on the horses. He's just being kind of a dick. And then he's eating an apple and he's cutting it off and he's eating it, and the little boy Max, what is his name, Noah, I can't remember his name.
Noah Ringer is the
Noah Ringer is the character. I'm sorry, but
Emmett's the character, Noah Ringer's the actor.
Yeah, I was just having such a hard time with the names.
Don't worry about the names.
Anyway, the little boy is just kind of like mad dogging him, watching him because he's hungry, I'm sure. And Harrison Ford finally offers him a piece of apple, and then he's like, you like my knife? And then the kid just doesn't say anything the whole time. He's just like nodding, and he ends up giving him the knife. He's like, you look after it. And it's we start to see like a little bit of a softer side to Colonel Moneybags. What's his name? Colonel
Dollarhide.
Dollarhide.
Just think of the killer in Red Dragon and Manhunter. It's Dollarhide.
Oh,
same
that's great.
name.
Yeah.
I think later Harrison Ford tells him to how to stab somebody with a knife or whatever, and then near the end of the movie, the kid is going to stab one of the aliens because they have these sort of armored chests that open up and these secondary hands come out, which are kind of cool.
I thought the aliens looked pretty neat, by the way. As far as that goes, like, I thought they were pretty interesting.
I'm of two minds about the aliens because on one hand, I think they're pretty okay designed. I like their eyes. They have these sort of almost frog-like eyes.
Yeah.
And I do like the secondary hands that come out.
Kind of more like lizards, actually.
Yeah, like lizardy, amphibian, reptilian. They are kind of a little bit generic in that way of monster design that I feel has been like a thing since CG became the way that we put our monsters on the screen. Like, I feel like a lot of CG designers design similar looking things. Like the Cloverfield monster looked kind of like these guys. The thing in Super 8 looked kind of like this.
Well, and wasn't this around the same time?
All around the same time, yeah. If Troy was on, he would have a lot to say about it because it's definitely a sort of CG animator thing. These designs tend to get a little bit sort of recycled through all these movies. You feel like all these guys have worked on the same movies, so we get these sort of similar designs. Hey, Tentpole listeners, lend us your ears for a brief moment so we can tell you about our new sponsor, Anchor. Have you ever wondered how we've managed to get this scintillating podcast up on all the platforms you crave? The secret to that is Anchor. I'm going to be honest with you, we had no clue whatsoever how to get a podcast out there to the masses. It would have probably taken us weeks to figure that stuff out, draining our enthusiasm and causing us to while away the hours on technical details that didn't interest us and made us wish we were dead, or at least doing something more fun. Thankfully, we didn't have to do that because we had Anchor.
Anchor is the all-in-one platform for podcasts. It can help with every aspect related to podcasting, from creating your podcast to monetizing it, distributing it to all the major platforms, and monitoring your downloads and listeners. They'll even host your podcast for free. In fact, all of this is free, and it frees up your time, allowing you to get your podcast started and out to listeners, allowing you more precious time to spend watching unboxing videos, ordering hilarious novelty shirts, or arguing online about Star Wars.
Yes, this is a shameless plug, but for something we truly use and believe in. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place.
Download the free, did we mention it's free? Anchor app through your preferred app store, or go to anchor.fm to get started.
I think for the purpose of this story, these aliens are fine. And I think the animation is good. The special effects are really good. I mean, all the production values are top notch for sure.
I didn't feel like it was too CG looking or anything, to be honest. And I'm pretty sensitive to that.
Yeah, it's not that it's too CG looking. It's just that when they're CG creatures, they seem to all come from the same factory.
Yeah, the same design.
Right.
But maybe that's what all aliens look like.
Maybe
we just don't know.
They definitely don't suck. I'm not like, oh, these aliens suck. But they're just a little bit generic-y. At the end of the movie, we need to have one of them have a distinctive marking so that we know he's the one that tortured Daniel Craig.
Sure.
They're no xenomorphs. Let's just put it that way.
No, they're not. But I especially know what you're talking about as far as like Cloverfield and that look and Super 8, especially with, I would say more with the body types.
Yeah.
Like they always have like those really muscular and they're like long arms and legs and
spindly long arms but with big thick bodies
and you can see the muscle definition in the legs and
sort
stuff.
Of squat heads.
Yeah.
Like it always cracks me up whenever you see a CG monster in a movie. The first thing it does is like roar at whoever it's attacking and like spittle comes out of its mouth. It's like just once I'd like to see a monster that doesn't roar at you first.
Hello.
What up? But anyway, that pretty much covers the monsters.
We also should let you know that we watched the extended version.
We did, yes. Which I think I could identify where the extended scenes were. The version I had was only the extended version. I felt a little bad subjecting Jen to the extended version right off the bat. But I actually thought it worked a little bit better.
I didn't mind. I wasn't like, this is still going on. Like I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I enjoyed this watch of Cowboys and Aliens. Yeah. I don't know when, if and when I'll watch it again, or I'll have a hankering to watch it again, but I might. I certainly liked it more than I thought I would.
We have been watching a lot of Westerns too lately. So I think you're also kind of like steeped in the genre at this point.
Yeah.
So it's kind of more fun to watch this movie, I think, if you really enjoy Westerns, because you can kind of see all the sort of tropes they're using and the way they're sort of playing with them. I think it can make it for a more enjoyable experience. Like I hadn't seen as many Westerns as I've seen now when I saw this the first time. And I got a little bored with it the first time because I just wasn't really into Westerns that much.
But now we're way into Westerns.
We're pretty into Westerns these days.
Yeah, this was the right time to watch it. I think I caught this at a good time for me personally. But I mean, the film just, continues with things getting in their way. They're trying to, basically, we do learn that Olivia Wilde is not human.
Yeah, well, what happens is they find the alien that they're tracking in the riverboat. I think we've gotten it out of order, and I think they run into the rustlers after the riverboat.
Okay.
And then I think they're trying to escape from them because they're like riding over this plane, and then while the rustlers are chasing them, then the aliens come swooping down and they start snatching people up, including like his old gang or whatever.
Right.
And then one of the spaceships snatches up Olivia Wilde. Daniel Craig at this point has sort of grown something of an attachment to her.
Yes.
Because they're the attractive leads of the movie. Yeah. And we should say that Olivia Wilde is quite a beautiful woman.
Oh, she's stunning.
Her and Daniel Craig are well matched because they've both got like these ice blue eyes.
Piercing.
Right, which, they've color timed the movie to really make them pop. This is what I would call an orange and teal movie, where it's like a lot of like oranges and then teals of their eyes and stuff. I also would like to say about Olivia Wilde, we've seen her in a lot of stuff, including that HBO 70s show, not The Deuce, the other one about the record company.
Oh, right. Vinyl. Yeah.
Which got canceled, but she was good in that.
She was great in that.
To her credit, she's become a director now. She's transitioned into directing. She directed Booksmart.
Yep.
And she's got some other projects lined up, and she's a good director. So go Olivia Wilde.
Also, as an actor, she's done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Like, she was in that other sci-fi film that we liked that took place where they were doing experiments in like a basement of a college. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
I like it. It was fun.
Well, most people did not like that movie. I forget what it's called. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah.
I was like thinking it was the Flatliners remake.
It's very much like Flatliners.
But there also was a Flatliners remake that she's not in. So that's why, yeah, I do need to look that up. It's The Lazarus Effect.
The Lazarus Effect, yeah.
Another sci-fi film. She was good in that.
Yeah, she's good.
She's good. She can't help what the rest of The Lazarus Effect was.
She's also in Tron Legacy, which may or may not be one day discussed on Tentpole Trauma. We'll see. But yeah, she's great. She's gorgeous. She does a good job. And so she gets snatched up by one of these ships, and Daniel Craig goes running after her, and we get this big sort of action scene where he somehow manages to jump on one of them by like riding his horse up a mountain and then jumping onto the ship, and then he blows up the ship and they fall into the water, and you think it's fine, and then the alien that was in the ship comes out of the water and stabs her.
That's when she gets injured.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he carries her back to the group, and so they have to walk through the desert, and she's sort of dying, and she's like asks him about his wife and stuff, and did you love her or whatever, and he's like, I must have, because he can't really remember everything. And then he brings her back to the group, and she's dead at that point.
But she had already shared with him earlier that she was not of this earth, and that she had taken this form so she could just like be.
No, she hadn't shared that with him.
Yes, she had.
She might hint at it, but she doesn't tell him that, because later he's like, don't ever do that to me again, because when she comes back.
I think she'd already told him.
And we're going to have to disagree on this point.
We'll just disagree, but I'm pretty sure she had told him.
Agree to disagree.
We'll agree to disagree for our marriage.
She definitely... She definitely did not spell it out clearly. If she said something, it was not made clear.
Okay.
Because he thinks she's dead at this point.
Well, yeah, but she could have been. There's no rules for even if she was. See, we don't know where she's from. She has explained that this thing has done something to her people.
Yes, she said they did something to my people, but she hasn't explained that she's from outer space too. She just makes it sound like she's from somewhere else in the country or something.
I just am saying that there was something that made me think it was kind of a little odd because they kissed when they landed in the water.
Yeah.
That was their first kiss. And I kind of thought like, well, good for you, Daniel Craig. You're kissing this otherworldly being.
So you had figured out that she was from outer space
because I
at
didn't
that
figure
point?
it out. I think she said something. I think she said, I took this form so I would be accepted or whatever.
She says that later. She says that when she comes back.
I guess we'll just need to watch it again.
She definitely, like you said, she says these creatures killed my people. She definitely says that. I think you're just smart enough to figure it out. She does not say, I'm an alien from outer space.
We'll see what Magna Viking has to say about this.
But she does later.
Yeah,
because what happens is he takes her back and now she's dead, but then they get set upon by Native Americans.
Sure.
And the Native Americans are Apaches, and the guy that's the sort of friend of Paul Dano, the handler, he can speak their language and he sort of communicates to them, but they bring them all back to like their bonfire and they throw her body right on the fire.
Brutal. Brutal.
And like Daniel Craig's like knocked down on the ground and he's watching like her body wrapped up just burn. I'm going to call them Indians in the context of this discussion just because that's how they're called in the movie. We know they're Native Americans. Yes. We would not refer to them as Indians in normal life, but in the movie they're called Indians, and back in the day in the Old West, that's what they were called incorrectly.
Yes.
So yeah, they're having this big Indian bonfire, and it's like, oh, they're going to presumably kill all the white men or whatever. And then Olivia Wilde comes out of the fire like this magical being and reveals that she's from outer space. And the Indians are sort of taken by her because they're more spiritual beings than we are. And so they sort of accept the white people with the help of the guy who can talk to them and stuff, and sort of explains who they are and what they're doing and what happened to them. And the aliens had also attacked the Indians too and taken some of their people. So common ground is reached.
Common ground is reached. And also Olivia Wilde can also speak their language.
Right.
Because she just starts speaking Apache or whatever, and everyone's like, huh? Because she's this otherworldly being, so she can fluently communicate with them as well.
They need to find out where the alien base is, and nobody really knows where that is, except Daniel Craig is having these sort of flash memories coming back to him where he wakes up in a lab and there's like an alien working on him, and he escapes through like a tunnel or whatever, and he sees the other people that have been captured and they're sort of staring up into space or whatever. These are just images that are sort of coming to him in these flashes, and they determine that they can figure out where it is if they sort of conduct this peyote-like ceremony where he takes some kind of drug and
ayahuasca, whatever it is. And like, why would these aliens that are experimenting on him put this thing on his wrist that can be used as a weapon against them?
I don't know.
I don't understand at all.
It seems like a dumb idea.
It seems like if you want to experiment on someone or you're going to enslave them or whatever, like, why would you give them this badass weapon on their wrist?
It doesn't make any sense. But I would say if you're trying to do some work for the movie, maybe they're just testing out if they can turn people into zombies with weapons on them or something.
It's fine. It didn't ruin the movie for me. I just kind of thought I missed something because I was like, did I zone out and miss why this is? I just thought at first, until we see him firing it off, that it was some sort of tracking device or something like that they had put on him,
Well, they could have just had it be like he stole it. He wakes up on the lab table and he just sees it and throws his hand in it and just steals it or something.
It's really not that important. I thought, like I said, I thought I missed something, and I'm glad that it wasn't me.
No, yeah, I thought the same thing while I was watching it this time. I was like, why do they put a weapon on him? That seems like a bad idea. They're not very smart aliens. So yeah, I mean, Daniel Craig's figured out where the aliens are hanging out, so they get together with the Indian tribe, and they all go track down the aliens where they are. Or did I miss something?
Oh, no. Except for everyone decides there's a moment where they decide they're going to band together and go to where this ship is, right? And then we see Daniel Craig ride off. It's like, he's abandoning us. Everyone's kind of bent.
Yeah.
But it's because we find he goes back to his gang because they need more manpower. They also need to just tie this thread into the end of the movie. This is another thing that doesn't totally make sense to me, where it's like, yeah, they need more manpower, so he's got to get his old gang, get them back in the movie so we can have more Walton Goggins, which is always a good thing. More Goggins.
I mean, he basically convinces them that if they don't help them destroy these aliens, they're going to take over the world, which I guess is true. But it's also if I was just this scummy bandit or whatever they are, I'd be like, well, yeah, whatever. I'm going to Mexico. Yeah. Have fun with that. But, it's a movie. And we've got to see that they're actually good guys in their hearts or whatever. But yeah, and this basically just leads us into our big action climax. I think in the extended version, one scene that I recognize not being in the other versions is they have a scene where they have a campfire the night before, and Daniel Craig and Olivia Wilde have another kind of romantic moment, and there's just more character stuff, the guy who's part of the crew sort of gets to actually partake in the ceremony with the other Indians, sort of making him feel more a part of his culture. So there's a little character moment for him there.
No, another big thing there is because the chief was ready to kill Harrison Ford, the guy who works for Harrison Ford, we don't really know his role, but he's also an Indian. He's the one that's doing the translating, says a bunch of stuff to the chief, which Olivia Wilde is telling Harrison Ford,
right?
Where he's like, he's saying that you're a good man and that you took me in after my parents were killed in the Mexican-Indian War.
Yeah.
And, that you treated me really well, and that, and just like all these really kind things. And you can just see Harrison Ford's icy heart just melting.
Yeah.
He's realizing he was like a son to him.
I think that scene is in the original cut, but I think it's just way smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, it was called an extended cut, which I think just means scenes are extended.
Go on a little longer.
Yeah.
The other thing that we forgot to mention that we should mention before we get to the end is, we did talk about Sam Rockwell's character, Doc, like kind of being a fish out of water in the Wild West. Consistently throughout the film, he's trying to learn. He doesn't even know how to shoot a gun.
Yeah.
So he's trying to learn how to shoot a gun. And first Clancy Brown is trying to teach him. And then, I think one of the outlaws, that's kind of a moment between the two of them. They're talking about guns or something too. And anyway, it's just a reoccurring theme that's going where he's trying to, and he's not doing very well throughout it. Like you always see him aiming at some sort of target and not hitting it.
And Clancy Brown was killed by the alien in the overturned boat.
That's right. We forgot to mention that. Yeah.
I mean, characters have been dying here and there, you know. We're getting away from going through every detail on this podcast, so you get the gist. People are dying. It happens in these movies. They climb up the side of this alien ship. It's sort of like buried in the ground, and there's a big, almost like building sticking out of the ground. Weirdly, the aliens are mining gold for some reason, which that's another thing that I'm just like, huh? They explain it in the
Olivia
movie.
Wilde had said, they're after gold like you are. It's just as precious to them as it is to you. It's that rare.
That's ridiculous.
And that's what ultimately brought them to Daniel Craig and his lady. Right. Is because Daniel Craig came in with a big bunch of gold, and they were like, woo, and they came there. So, yeah, gold is bad news.
This element of the movie just is pretty
flimsy.
It doesn't work that well for me. It's fine. Yeah, but because Daniel Craig had stole a bunch of gold, and so they came after him because he had gold.
Yes. I think Harrison Ford's like, there's gold here, because they're mining gold in this area. And they also have these caverns down there because these are nocturnal creatures, pretty much. They can go out during the day. They're not like vampires, but they can't see.
Probably not a good idea then to invade a planet where half of the time it's in darkness. This is kind of like the signs problem. The aliens and signs are allergic to water. Maybe don't pick a planet that's mostly water then.
Especially if it was during daylight savings time.
I know.
In certain areas of the West where the sun
never
goes down.
Like Oregon, for instance. Anyway.
We like darkness.
So, yeah, they Daniel Craig and some other guy climb up the side of this thing and throw a bundle of dynamite in. There's
3 bundles of dynamite.
There's a funny joke where the guy who's carrying the dynamite has all these matches and he drops all the matches, and he's like, we're going to have to climb all the way back down to get the matches. And Daniel Craig just takes the cigarette out of the guy's mouth and lights it with that. Not a lot of jokes in this movie, but there's some good.
Goggins has some good stuff. Daniel Craig always has great, subtle comedic timing too. And we get some funny stuff from Sam Rockwell too. There's some stuff that's there.
Paul Dano,
obviously.
Yeah,
because he's ridiculous.
So they blow up the thing, and that gets all the aliens to come out.
Yeah, they're blowing up the area because we see actually when they're outside the ship, when they're kind of watching it, we do see one of the droney looking ships fly into kind of this landing bay area or whatever at the top of the big mothership, and then there's kind of a force field or something there. So they're blowing up that.
The intention is to drive the aliens out into the open, because then they can sort of use like tactics to sort of fight them. And while they're doing that, Daniel Craig and Olivia Wilde are going to sneak in through the tunnel that he originally escaped from, where he remembers where it is now. So we're getting this sort of, climax where these multiple things are going on. The kid is climbed up on a ridge and is sort of watching it all with the spyglass. It's kind of a nice way to show some of the action because it's like, sort of framing it from his point of view. The dog was there with him, which Annie really appreciated.
She sure did.
The dog character is back in the action.
Very good actor.
I'm not exactly sure what the kid is supposed to be doing. Like in a movie that was modern, you could have one person being the lookout who had like earbuds in, being like, the aliens are over here, the aliens are there, but he can't communicate to anybody. So
I think they just told him to get out of the way, and he just happened to have the spyglass. I mean, they just probably told him to lay low.
He just doesn't really factor much into the battle, except at one point he gets like trapped by an alien, and then the alien goes to grab him with its interior arms, and he stabs it with a knife and kills it because of what Harrison Ford taught him. Another thing that happens during this fight is the Native American friend who's been part of the gang this whole time gets mortally wounded and dies. And Harrison Ford has a moment with him where he's like, "You are the son I always wished I had." Not Paul Dano, his terrible son.
Yeah. Well, and then as the Native American son is passing on, he was like, go get Percy.
It's kind of cheesy.
Oh, it's sweet. I don't know. I'm fine with it.
It works.
Yeah.
It's cheesy, but it works.
Yeah.
And then at one point, Harrison Ford like saves the chief, and they have a moment of just like looking at each other. Olivia Wilde and Daniel Craig are inside the ship, and Daniel Craig fights the alien that originally experimented on him. We know it's the same alien because he's got a scar in his face. When Daniel Craig escaped, he cut the alien with its own like laser tool or whatever. A lot of this stuff is just okay. Like it's fine. It's the end of the movie, big budget movie stuff where people are moving around. There's lots of explosions and aliens attacking. I will say, I know you're sort of action movie averse in some ways, with like big CGI stuff.
This wasn't too much.
It wasn't that bad.
No,
honestly.
I would have told you if it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not too CG. The battle didn't go on that long. There was enough stuff going on in between to not bring me to battle fatigue. Yeah, they go in and Daniel Craig takes out the alien that had done experiments on him and killed his wife or whatever. And they free all the people. They find all the people are there. And this is when I said to you, I was like, oh, it's the deadlights, because it's just like they're just staring at this. And Olivia Wilde tells him, like, don't look at the light. And he starts looking at the light, too.
Yeah.
And she, like, shoots it. And it's some sort of goo, plasma membrane thing. And it just bursts. And then they're all like, huh? So she's tasked with getting them out of their shackles, and she had said, as far as what will they remember, and she was like, it just depends on the person, which was important that they say that, because once they do make it out at the end and everything is said and done, some people are remembering things and other people are not.
Yeah. And you're right about the deadlights, especially since later we got the big budget movie, and it was really like this scene in the movie. Like, it felt like the It movie was actually ripping off Cowboys and Aliens, but it's the other way around. When I first saw the movie, I just kind of felt myself a little bit tuned out of a lot of this, but watching it this time, it was working for me because I had been paying more attention to the character stuff that was going on. And there are character moments in here, so it works out pretty well. And yeah, they free all the people, and then the only way to make sure the ship is going to be fully destroyed is Olivia Wilde has to take the device off of Daniel Craig's arm and go in and blow it up. And the way she does that, he can't get it off of himself because he's and she's like, you just need to not think about it.
Well, she's like, you can control it with your mind. It's the same way you've been using it to like shoot things. And so he tries to do that, but he's like, it's not working. And she's like, you just need to not think about it. And so then she like goes in for a big smooch, and that bracelet falls right off.
Yep. And so, yeah, she takes it and goes off into the core of the alien ship or whatever. A really long sequence of her going through these
climbing and climbing and climbing.
Yeah, it's way too much.
Yeah.
But they're trying to build suspense, and there's like an alien following her. But it's like they cut to that so many times. You're like, come on. We don't need this many cuts to her climbing further and further and further in.
Maybe this was the extended version.
Maybe. It's just because they're trying to time it all out perfectly, and there's other things going on.
And like, everybody getting out on time.
Right, like Harrison Ford goes running back into the ship to help Daniel Craig so that they can kind of have a moment where they like work together as heroes. But it's like Olivia Wilde's like, well, I'm just going off to blow this thing up and like sacrifice myself. Like they can't even save her.
No, it's definitely going to be a self-sacrifice.
There's a lot of heroic sacrifices in this movie. Perhaps one too many.
Maybe.
Anyway, Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig get out of the ship, and the ship takes off into the sky, and then Olivia Wilde makes it to the core and sets off the weapon and detonates herself and everything. Did you feel like this shot of when you see this ship going up into the sky and then exploding kind of uncomfortably
reminded you of the Challenger explosion?
Totally.
No, it totally did. And that's immediately what I went to, and I saw it in person.
Yeah.
So it's burned in my memory forever. But yeah, totally. I didn't even say anything because it really uncomfortably looked like that.
It's like they kind of modeled the explosion on the Challenger explosion.
Honestly, kind of bummed me out.
Yeah.
It's like, this is an odd choice.
Maybe it wasn't intentional, but
I don't know.
It was hard not to think of that if you remembered seeing the Challenger explosion on TV, or like you did seeing it in person.
Right.
It was uncomfortably recalled it.
Totally. I'm glad that you had that recall
totally
too. Yeah.
That.
Anyway.
So the aliens are defeated. People are coming out of their sort of mind wipe comas. Some people remember things. Some people don't. Sam Rockwell, we should say, got a moment where he
got a good shot.
He got a good shot.
He ended up saving somebody important.
Dollarhide.
Was it Dollarhide? Yeah, which was great. It was finally he got his shot. He got his man or his alien.
Yeah.
I did jokingly say to you, I was like, well, maybe Paul Dano will come out a changed man. And he did.
Yes.
Which was great. Like, he came out and now he's like the son that Dollarhide would be proud to have. Like, he's totally not a jerk. He's just being a decent guy.
A little convenient, one might say.
Hey, I'll take it. He was terrible before.
It's a very happy ending because we get this last sort of scene in the town and everyone's having a good time whooping up at the bar, and Sam Rockwell feels like he can be a real man now, so he's feeling good about himself. And Paul Dano is a nice guy now and
paying for his drinks.
And Dad's going to put his name on the checks, so he's part of the family business. And Daniel Craig rides into town one last time to say his goodbyes, and the guys are all like, you can stay. And Daniel Craig's like, well, I am wanted. And they're like, I think you might have died in the explosion. I don't think Jake Lonergan made it out of that place alive, implying that they're not going to turn him in or anything. But he's the kind of guy that is just going to ride off into the sunset.
That's it.
I think that had this movie been a success, they would have made a sequel and we would have gotten Jake Lonergan in some other situation that involved
something supernatural.
Yeah. There's a subgenre of westerns called weird westerns that has like mashups where, vampires and cowboys and stuff like that.
Was the Wild Wild West, was that aliens too? That was like giant spiders or something?
It was mechanical. It was sort of steampunky.
Okay.
But it was definitely not something that would have happened in the real West. It's science fiction. But I don't think they were aliens.
Are there cowboys versus werewolves or something like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, there have been lower budget movies where there's like westerns set with supernatural creatures and stuff.
Okay.
There's, I believe, Billy the Kid versus Dracula, for instance. There's a really low budget movie about that.
Well, I mean, we were blessed with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter,
Right,
so
yeah,
it was around the same time.
Exactly. But yeah, so this movie cost $163 million, which was a lot of money for something like this.
Oh, yeah.
I will say that it looks good.
Oh, it looks
so
really good.
The money is there.
Yeah, no, I think the quality and the level of actors they got and the performances they gave and everything, like, this is not a case where I'm like, what did they do with that money? Like, what was that, Gigli?
Yeah. This is no Gigli.
Yeah, I'm like, how did they spend all that? Like, what happened? I don't feel that way about this at all.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford
right there.
right there, that's a lot of money.
Big chunk of
change. And then, the special effects are all top notch and everything. So yeah, you can see where the money went. But it ended up only making $170 million worldwide. So it made $7 million more than its production budget. And with advertising costs and everything, that's a big loss. They lost a lot of money on this. So it definitely deserves to be in the old Tentpole Trauma discussion. I think we both sort of expressed our opinions that we like the movie.
I definitely liked it, and I liked it more than I thought that I would.
Yeah, it's a perfectly fine diversion if you feel like watching a Western with a sci-fi twist to it.
Yeah.
I think you can do a lot worse than Cowboys and Aliens. But why do you think it didn't do well?
I have no idea. I honestly, I think about films like Independence Day or something like that. I mean, is it because it's too genre, because it's Western and it's doing the sci-fi thing? I don't know, because with the names that are attached to it, and it's a fine, it came out in the summertime. Like, it couldn't be more of primed to be like a summer blockbuster. Again, I'm not blown a bit away by it. I'm not like, wow, why didn't everybody see this? But I am kind of like, why didn't everybody see this? Because I feel like there's other films that are kind of in the same vein that did do really well because they're summer blockbusters. Like, I think people just want to go and see fun, films where things are getting blown up and, there's some endearing moments, and I don't know. It hits all the beats, I feel like, to be a good summer blockbuster film. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but that's what it is to me. That's why I looked to see what else came out that week. And there was nothing else that was phenomenal that came out that week.
It struggled to beat the Smurfs, which
I know,
came
I saw
out
the Smurfs came out that week. Well, that's what I was looking at. I was like, who?
It did beat the Smurfs by like $1 million or something, but not by much.
I mean, look, I have nostalgia for the Smurfs, but I certainly never saw the film, but I would have not thought that it would be competing with the Smurfs.
I think there's a couple of things at play, and I think mostly it comes down to the fact that this was a genre mashup that I think people just really weren't on board with. I do think the fact that it is such a Western probably didn't help. The thing about The Mandalorian is it's Star Wars.
Right. So it's got Star Wars.
And like the Western stuff is the stuff that's kind of in the background.
Right.
Like, you only really know the Western stuff if you're familiar with the Westerns. Whereas this is Western, like up front with aliens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the sci-fi element is really the lesser part of this movie. So I think that it was a mixture that wasn't really working for people. I think that was something a lot of the critics sort of criticized it for. They were like, it's just kind of like a mediocre Western with a not very good alien invasion movie, which I think is a little unfair, because I think it's actually like a decent Western with a pretty good alien invasion movie mixed together. But the critics weren't crazy about it, so they weren't saying great things about it. And then I don't think Westerns have been big business for a long time. I think you can make like low budget Westerns that can do well, but I think when you're making a Western that's almost $200 million, you're not going to make that kind of money back. I mean, Lone Ranger is another giant tentpole trauma. That was like a big budget Western that totally flopped.
Well, I don't think there's been successful, like you said, low budget or maybe even indie, like what was that? Tomahawk?
Bone
Bone
Tomahawk,
Tomahawk,
yeah.
like there's certain ones that have done well that are not big budget mainstream films, but I would say like the last that I can recall big budget Western success would have been like Wyatt Earp or Tombstone or something like that. And that was like mid 90s, I think.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a big money genre anymore. I think if you're going to do a Western, you need to bring the budget down. And I mean, obviously, this did have the aliens element to it, but I just don't think it was prominent enough.
I think I guess I just expect people to be more drawn to the alien side of things and just kind of roll with whatever genre the alien is, because I think people always like to see alien invasions. I don't know.
Yeah, they do, but I just honestly think that a lot of people don't like Westerns.
Yeah, that's true. And then I guess also it's just, like I said, it's hitting me at a time where I'm really into Westerns right now. So it's like, I'm all in. Yeah, and just with, I mean, having freaking Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig, like,
Yeah.
and I just, honest to God, I cannot remember this movie being advertised at all. Like, I mean, I don't think I had cable at the time or anything. And like I said, I was going to, when I would go to the movies, I was going to the New Art, which is like a art house, so to speak, theater. And that was just what I was doing because it was next to work and in my neighborhood. And so I guess I wasn't seeing the trailers for this as much. I don't remember it at all.
I vaguely remember seeing some trailers for it, and I don't think they were very good. So I think that was probably hurting it too. I think the trailers weren't selling it right. They weren't marketing it right. I also think we were entering into a time, which unfortunately we still are in, where if it's not something that people really are invested in, some IP like Marvel or DC or Star Wars, people just aren't going to show up. It's sad. It bums me out. And we've discussed this before because it feels like no one can make a sort of original idea anymore and have it be successful because it's got to have that Marvel stamp on it or that Star Wars stamp on it or whatever, which is a bummer. Like, it used to be like you could just make a cool movie and people would be into it because it was cool. But now it's like McDonald's. Everything's got to have that brand on there or else no one's going to show up.
All about branding. And God, I mean, dealing with pandemic movie stuff now, it's like really hard to get your movie out there.
Yeah, I just think IP is king, and I think that this was really heading into the era of IP completely dominating. That same summer was the first opening salvo of like the Marvel
Captain America
movies.
that year?
Yeah, Thor and Captain America had both came out. Avengers was coming out the next year.
2012.
So we're all leading up to this big moment where Marvel's going to suddenly become the dominating force. I mean, John Favreau had made Iron Man and Iron Man 2 before this movie, so he was part of that. Yeah, I just think we were just heading into this new era of like IP being king, Marvel being king. Star Wars was coming back. I just think it's a really hard thing to sell to people now. Even though it was based on a comic or whatever, nobody read
the comic. Nobody knew. I didn't know about the comic until you shared that with me today. And it's like,
it wasn't a factor.
It's hard for people to take a chance on something that they don't have some sort of familiarity with.
Yeah, you just basically can't really make $200 million movies about things that aren't branded by one of these big IPs.
Well, no, and if you think about it, this was PG-13, so this was definitely for younger folks to go see too. And yeah, I mean, movies it's expensive, especially if you're a family or whatever. And so I understand you're gonna pick and choose what you're gonna go see in the theater.
I hope that our listener who requested this wasn't hoping for us to totally hate on the movie. That's not really our thing, right?
No, we don't hate on movies, and I wouldn't think so because they're obviously, I mean, if they're James Bond fans, I have to think that they're Daniel Craig fans.
Yeah.
There's nothing to hate on this film, and we don't do that anyway. That's not what this is about.
I think the worst thing that you can say about this film is that it's kind of forgettable. Like once you've seen it, you're kind of like, oh, that was okay, and then you just sort of forget it even exists.
I'm thankful that we watched the film and went right into this because I already was forgetting
Yeah.
how things were happening, because it's just that's probably its flaw, is that it's not super memorable.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's kind of just following the standard beats of
both the genres
both
that
genres.
it's working with. It
Right.
follows the standard beats of a Western, and it follows
and an alien invasion.
an alien invasion, yeah. So,
Right. And that's perfectly fine, but it's not anything that you're going to be like, oh, but in this one, this is what happened. Do you
Right.
remember this? And
there's not a lot of unique things in this movie that you haven't seen in other movies that will make you remember it. I think that's kind of its central problem.
I think the only uniqueness to this is just the premise. That's it. Is just like we're putting these two things together. That makes it unique. However, the storytelling is just kind of going with what happens in those genres.
I often say this. It's like the movies that really stand out usually have one scene
Right.
or sequence that you're like, oh, that was like
Right.
the thing. And so you always remember the movie because of one sequence that happened. And this movie doesn't really have that.
It didn't have that, and if it did, it didn't have that effect.
Yeah.
Like if they thought that was something that was happening, I don't know what that was supposed to be.
That's sort of the problem when you're trying to make something that sort of is going to appeal to everybody, is those kind of edges tend to get sanded off, and you end up with something that's like really competent and well done. Like
Right.
Clearly everybody involved in this is like at the top of their game.
Right.
And even the screenwriting, generic though it may be,
It's pretty tight.
it's tight. It's
Yeah.
effective in what it's trying to do. What they're trying to do, they're doing it well.
Right.
The direction is all really good, the special effects and everything. It just doesn't have anything about it that you're like, yeah, that scene in Cowboys and Aliens when this happens. It's not in the movie.
No, it's not in the movie. And it almost, I would say, it seems like what you're saying as far as like, let's get all the beats and sand off the edges, is that they were priming this to be like a slam dunk summer blockbuster film. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to give people exactly what they want from both of these genres.
Yeah.
And people were like, no, I'm going to go see the Smurfs.
Right.
So world wasn't ready for this genre mashup, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I think if they had done something a little crazier with it, it might have been something that people would have
People
at least
talk
talked
about, right?
Yeah.
And then get people in the theater maybe
Right.
based on that.
I think the people that did go to see this, I mean, because there were a bunch of people that saw it.
170 million people
Yeah.
or dollars
I
towards
just
it.
think
Yeah.
they went and saw it and they were like, oh, that was fun, and
Yeah.
never thought about it ever again.
And didn't tell somebody you should go see this or whatever. They were probably like, yeah, it was fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't catching fire word of mouth.
No. All right. Well, I'm going to go lasso up someone's grandpa and throw a dead body onto a fire and punch Walton Goggins right in the mouth and break his teeth.
Annie's going to want to watch this again.
Annie's definitely going to want to watch this again. That about does it today for Tentpole Trauma. If you like what you heard, check out our social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just look for Tentpole Trauma. That was easy, wasn't it? If you like us, hit subscribe and leave us a sterling review on iTunes, if you dare. If you really like us, head over to patreon.com and get involved in one of our fabulous tiers. You'll be glad you did. Want to communicate with Tentpole Trauma? Send an email to tentpoletrauma@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And who knows, one day you may even get your email read on one of our shows. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you real soon.